Welcome to this edition of Week in Review. That's right, it is Week in Review, even though you see the GPS logo behind me. That's because that is going to be the focus of this edition of Week in Review. We have our friends, Pastor Dan Smith, who's pastor at a church in Garden Grove, and also our co-host of GPS is John Pauline. He's the leader of a religious department of a world-famous university here in the city of Loma Linda. So I'm going to start out with John to tell us about what is GPS? What do those letters stand for?
Well, I think it's kind of a double play. You have on the one hand, GPS is the idea of global positioning system. Yeah. Everybody kind of knows it just as GPS. And the idea is that in a very chaotic world, is there some fixed point that we can orient to? And that's now a spiritual concept. And the fixed point, I think for many of us, would have to do with prophecy and how God has located us within history. And of course, for us, we also call it God's prophetic surprises, which means that this program is not designed to simply repeat what everybody's heard before, but to look within the book of Revelation for some surprises, some things that maybe you didn't expect to be there. So it's a little more innovative than some more traditional programs, and for that reason, we also have younger people on most of the time to help give us a different perspective than maybe Dan and I would have had before. Ever happened, Dan? I don't know.
In the classical definition of GPS, global positioning satellites, there appear to be three that are part of your program. Now, I'm not one of them. One of them is missing. And tell us about Sarah. Who is she?
Pastor, her name is Sarah May Cologne. She's our youth pastor down at Garden Grove, early 30s, just had her birthday a couple of days ago. Grew up in the ministry, grew up in Africa with her missionary parents, who both now work in our headquarters back east, and then went from Africa to Russia, and then to in the headquarters area in Washington, D.C. She calls Dr. John Uncle John because where were you all together?
Well, her father was my roommate in college, and so we've always stayed close together. And then when their kids were small, they would often come stay at our house for an easy vacation. And then for a while, they actually pastored within a few miles of where we lived. So the kids knew each other when they were quite small, and kind of thought of each other as cousins. And so it sort of went south that way.
So she's just our counterbalance, just to represent young adults and millennials and ask questions, and just as a breath of fresh air. The emails I get about the show usually mention Sarah May, you know, because she just has a fresh way of looking at the world and has a bounce and a creativity. We just love her.
So if I could stretch it a bit under the GPS theory, you guys are the satellites, right? Focusing all this new information, not really new, but as I understand it from John, it's a different perspective, right? So how do you get so many perspectives out of one book? Or even one verse?
Very, very possibly it's the way God designed it. The book of Revelation is almost designed like a computer game. You can start with the surface reading, and everything on the surface tells a story. But then you realize that these symbols, these ideas, these places, these people in the book of Revelation all had a history before. They're going back to the New Testament, going back to the Old Testament, going back all the way to creation. And so with all of these interlocking stories in play, as people gradually study the book, they see more and more things. And as their vision expands, new things come into play. So sometimes the meaning you saw on the surface is not the meaning that's deeper under. And if you don't mind, let me just give one example. On the surface, God looks kind of dark and judgmental and punishing in the book of Revelation. You have people being slaughtered in large numbers. You have plagues falling all over the place. So it's possible for a person to read this book and say, this God is almost a monster. But then when you get a little below the surface, when you see what's going on, you discover that power in the universe is wielded by a slaughtered lamb. The slaughtered lamb looks like a lion at first glance, but becomes a slaughtered lamb, which means God doesn't win his way through violence and through power. God wins his way through loving sacrificial persuasion. And so as people dig deeper into the book, they should expect to be surprised.
So
Good.
you are like the host of the program, but I understand you guys are
The straight man.
yeah, the co-host, the straight man. Why do you do this? I mean, why is this important to present this in this manner?
There's my own personal story with it. I think I probably told this the first show. I remember sitting in college and they were going through Revelation and, you know, very traditional interpretations, which I respect, you know, that doesn't mean that they're wrong. But they would read the text and then they would say, this means, you know, some battle 1,500 years ago. And what is in that verse about scorpions means that particular battle? How did you pick that battle out of 2,000 years that was the fulfillment? But every generation has found interpretations and fulfillments from the book. But we believe, because it's a book for the last days, those pictures should be even more clear as we get closer to the last days. So every time we pass through it, we should see something new. And we have a chance to do it with someone who's been studying this for 40 years.
Yeah.
So Sarah and I are not the scholars. I've read it and taught it, and I'm just finishing a class tonight in my church. But John is the one who has been the one writing a commentary and has done videos and has studied it all his life. So we bounce off him and ask questions to make him work, but we really are here to set him up because I just out of honor, you know, he's written the books. I got his books out this week. I'm teaching a class on world religions and needed, so I'll go get John out, you know, and find the pages and copy them off for the class. So we're blessed, I think, to hear his take on it. But who knows that we might have something new in this iteration as we go through Revelation.
I think one thing that can be hard for people to realize, it's obvious, but yet it's hard to really implement, and that's the idea change is wired into the way things are. Plants grow, children grow, everything is changing. And that is true. Every generation looks at the next generation and say, what's wrong with the kids today? They said that when I was little. A lot of people are saying that now about Sarah's generation and below and so on. And yet each generation lives in a very different world. That's definitely true today. And if that is the case, then for the gospel to be relevant, it needs to engage each generation on its own terms. Right. We like to present the gospel on our terms, but each generation needs to embrace it on its own terms. And sometimes the older generation is helpful in that. Sometimes.
So what is
We're trying to be helpfful, but Sarah keeps us straight.
Yeah, and you know, I should explain that we interrupted the taping of GPS just to bring you this special edition of Week in Review, and they were just about to start the taping. We were waiting for Sarah to come from, was it Garden Grove? Dan? Long trip, and you know what the traffic's like. So we took this advantage to talk about Sarah because she's not here. What is the greatest division that you see between the generation of Sarah and yourself? What is the divide? What is the difference?
Well, when it comes to truth, my generation was grounded in what you call Christian modernism, in which you find your truth in the Bible. But the generation growing up today has a very different perspective. They found people's interpretations of the Bible to be all over the map. They found churches to be all over the map. They found even science sometimes to produce results that are all over the map, or what some people call alternative facts and things like that. So in a very confusing world, the younger generation is kind of despairing that a GPS actually exists. And they're rather thinking, well, you know, as I share my stories with other people, as we enter into relationship, that's where truth comes. I learn a little from this person, I learn a little from that. And so, for example, my generation would tend to look at a Muslim or a Catholic, as a Seventh-day Adventist and just say, those people are different. They're kind of strange. What's wrong with them? This generation would rather look at those and say, oh, that's interesting. What can I learn from them? What piece of truth maybe do they hang on to that I've missed? It's a completely change in attitude. And traditional methods of attempting to reach people tend to follow that approach. We're right, you're wrong, listen up or else. And that doesn't work with this younger generation. So I think those of us who care deeply about them coming to faith need to think seriously about how we go about it.
Okay. Well, just got a couple of minutes left, and you're just about to tape your next 3 programs. Dan, what are they going to be about?
Today is Revelation 4 and 5, what are called throne room vision. So John looks up and sees the throne, and here's God on the throne, and he has a scroll with seals that no one can open. And so we're going to wrestle today with Jesus, the Lion and the Lamb, who's able to open the scroll. With who are the 24 elders? Everyone debates that. John is going to give us the answer. When was the scroll opened up? And so we're going to dig through that in the 3 shows we taped today.
Anything to add, John?
Well, I think definitely as we look at this generation and as we see that the text that we're looking at, it's a heavenly vision that is portrayed here. There is a GPS. There is something going on that we can all relate to. And the big question as we wrestle between the generations is how can this next generation develop that sense of a GPS, that sense of a pole, that sense of something solid? Because really the world today is constantly changing. You can't trust images, you can't trust movies, you can't trust news anymore, you can't trust government. And in that context of distrust, is there a way that we can come to trust in the universe? Can we trust in the one who sits on the throne? That, I think, is the question that Revelation poses to us. And the answer it gives is yes. When you see that God in Jesus Christ, you can trust in him. You can find a solid pole for your life.
Well, there you have it from the studios of the Loma Linda Broadcasting Network. This is Week in Review on the GPS set, and I understand that Sarah has just got out of makeup. These guys are ready to tape the latest editions episodes for you, and the first one, as a result of this taping, is going to be seen on February 5th, and then a couple of weeks after will be the other shows. So thank you for joining us for this edition of Week in Review. Ganem and Hannah will be back next time on the Loma Linda Broadcasting Network.